LETTER the 31st of Life in Mexico. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Life in Mexico by Francis Calderon de la Barca. Letter the 31st. Leave Mexico. Cuernavaca. Tierra Caliente. Atlacamulco. Orange groves. Sugar cane. Annual produce. Will of Cortes. Description. Coffee plantation. Scorpions. List of venomous reptiles. Acapasingo. Doubts and difficulties. A decision. Atlacamulco, February the 2nd. A quiet day in a hospitable country house. Too sunny to go out and nothing else to do are temptations sufficient to induce me to sit down and give you an account of our proceedings during these last 2 days. Yesterday, the 1st of February, at 4 in the morning, very sleepy, we set off in the diligence which we had taken for ourselves, our sole luggage, 2 portmanteaus and a carpet bag, our dresses, dark strong calico gowns, large Panama hats, rebosos tied on like scarves, and thick green barege veils. A government escort of 4 soldiers with a corporal, renewed 4 times, accompanied us as far as Cuernavaca, which is about 18 leagues from Mexico, and the entrance, as it were, to Tierra Caliente. These are supposed sufficient to frighten away 3 times the number of robbers, whose daring, however, has got to such a height, that no diligence now arrives from Puebla without being robbed. 6 robberies have happened there in the last fortnight, and the road to Cuernavaca is said to be still more dangerous. We took chocolate before starting, and carried with us a basket of cold meat and wine, as there is nothing on the road that can be called an inn. When we set off it was cool, almost cold. The astral lamps were out, and the great solar lamp was not yet lighted. But soon, like lobster boiled, the morn from black to red began to turn. By the time we had reached San Agustin, where we changed horses, the sun had risen, enabling us to see all the horrors of the road which, after leaving that beautiful village with its trees and gardens, winds over the mountains, amongst great volcanic rocks, a toilsome ascent, and passes by the village of Ajusco, a miserable robber's nest. Yet the view as we looked back from this barren tract, while the sun was breaking over the summits of the mountains, was very grand in its mixture of fertility and wildness, in its vast extent of plains and villages, with their groves and gardens, and in its fine view of Mexico itself, white and glittering in the distance. The mountains of Ajusco, clothed with dark forests of pine, frowned on our right, and looked worthy of its brigand-haunted reputation. At La Guardia, a collection of miserable huts, we changed horses and declined some suspicious-looking frijoles in dirty saucers, which were offered to us, a proof both that we were young travellers in this country, and that we had not exhausted our basket of civilized provender. The road wound round through a succession of rocks and woods till we reached Cruz del Marques, the Marquis being of course Cortes, while the cross, it is said, was planted there by him to mark the limits of his territory, or rather of that which the Indian Emperor had assigned him. About 2 o'clock the heat became intense, and we began to see and to feel symptoms of our approach to Tierra Caliente. We arrived at the Indian village of Huilchilaque, which is rather pretty, with cane cottages and a good many flowering trees, and from the eminence on which it is situated, the hot land is visible. The diligence now began galloping down the rocky and stony descent. The country looked even more arid than before, the vegetation more dried up. Not a tree, but here and there at long intervals a feathery cocoa or a palm, and occasionally some beautiful unknown wild flowers. But the heat, the dust, the jolting! When at length we rattled through Cuernavaca, and stopped before the quiet-looking inn, it was with joy that we bade adieu, for some time at least, to all diligences, coaches, and carriages, having to trust for the future to four-legged conveyances which we can guide as we please. Cuernavaca (Cow's Horn). The ancient Quanahuac was one of the 30 cities which Charles V. gave to Cortes, and afterwards formed part of the estates of the Duke of Monteleone, representative of the family of Cortes as Marquis of the Valley of Oajaca. It was celebrated by the ancient writers for its beauty, its delightful climate, and the strength of its situation, defended on one side by steep mountains, and on the other by a precipitous ravine, through which ran a stream, which the Spaniards crossed by means of two great trees that had thrown their branches across the barranca, and formed a natural bridge. It was the capital of the Tlahuaca nation, and after the conquest, Cortes built here a splendid palace, a church, and a convent of Franciscans, believing that he had laid the foundation of a great city. And in fact, its delicious climate, the abundance of the water, the minerals said to exist in the neighbourhood, its fine trees, delicious fruits, and vicinity to the capital, all combined to render it a flourishing city. It is, however, a place of little importance, though so favoured by nature, and the conqueror's palace is a half-ruined barrack, though a most picturesque object, standing on a hill behind which starts up the great white volcano. There are some good houses, and the remains of the church which Cortes built, celebrated for its bold arch, but we were too tired to walk about much, and waited most anxiously for the arrival of horses and men from the sugar estate of Don Anselmo Zurutuza at Atlacamulco, where we were to pass the night. The house where the diligence stopped was formerly remarkable for the fine garden attached to it, and belonged to a wealthy proprietor. We sat down amongst the fruit trees, by the side of a clear tank, and waited there till the arrival of our horses and guides. It was nearly dusk when they came, the sun had gone down, the evening was cool and agreeable, and after much kicking and spurring, and loading of mules and barking of dogs, we set off over hill and dale, through pretty wild scenery, as far as we could distinguish by the faint light, climbing hills and crossing streams for 2 leagues, till at length the fierce fires pouring from the sugar oven chimneys of Atlacamulco gave us notice that we were near our haven for the night. We galloped into the courtyard amongst dogs and negroes and Indians, and were hospitably received by the administrador, the agent. Greatly were we divided between sleep and hunger, but hunger gained the victory, and an immense smoking supper received our most distinguished attention. This morning, after a refreshing sleep, we rose and dressed at 8 o'clock, late hours for tierra caliente, and then went out into the coffee plantation and orange walk. Anything so lovely! The orange trees were covered with their golden fruit and fragrant blossom. The lemon trees, bending over, formed a natural arch, which the sun could not pierce. We laid ourselves down on the soft grass, contrasting this day with the preceding. The air was soft and balmy, and actually heavy with the fragrance of the orange blossoms and starry jasmine. All around the orchard ran streams of the most delicious clear water, trickling with sweet music, and now and then a little cardinal, like a bright red ruby, would perch on the trees. We pulled bouquets of orange blossom, jasmine, lilies, double red roses, and lemon leaves, and wished we could have transported them to you, to those lands where winter is now wrapping the world in his white winding sheet. The gardener, or coffee planter, such a gardener, Don Juan by name, with an immense black beard, Mexican hat, and military sash of crimson silk, came to offer us some orangeade, and having sent to the house for sugar and tumblers, pulled the oranges from the trees, and drew the water from a clear tank overshadowed by blossoming branches, and cold as though it had been iced. There certainly is no tree more beautiful than the orange, with its golden fruit, shining green leaves, and lovely white blossoms, with so delicious a fragrance. We felt this morning as if Atlacamulco was an earthly paradise. It belongs, in fact, to the Duke of Monteleone and his